continuing to provide quality design to our clients and communities. It's one of the reasons why our state considers construction as an essential need. Participating in this webinar is also part of learning to communicate and connect in ways that bring us together. We want to remind you that there are pandemic-related resources for you on AIACalifornia.org. These resources are being updated daily, including a legislative update by AIACA Government Relations Director, Mark Christian. As always, additional resources will be added as they arise. In addition to many of your local chapters hosting member town halls, AIACA will also be hosting a special town hall on Monday, March 30th. Registration information was just sent out, so keep an eye out for that in your inbox today. Now on to today's webinar, the third chapter of the AIACA Climate Action webinar series. If you missed the first two webinars, be sure to check out the climate action portion of AIACalifornia.org for the recordings, slide decks, and additional helpful resources. As you know, this webinar series is centered around each of the pillars of the AIA National Framework for Design Excellence. Design is not just about aesthetic components, but how buildings perform for people. The Framework for Design Excellence is made up of 10 measures, formerly known as the COTE Top 10. It organizes our thinking, facilitates conversations with our clients and the communities we serve, and sets meaningful goals and targets for climate action. Today's webinar focuses on design for integration. Using this lens while looking at your next project, think about the following. What is the big idea behind this project, and how did the approach towards sustainability inform the design concept? Is the design shaped around the project's goals and performance criteria, providing utility, beauty, and delight? How does the project engage all the senses for its users and connect people to place? What makes this building one that people will fight to preserve? How do individual design strategies provide multiple benefits across the full triple bottom line of social, economic, and environmental value? So how to ask questions on this webinar? Using the Q&A box in the lower or upper menu bar of your Zoom window, feel free to type in questions for Angie to answer during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. And now I'll introduce our speaker. Angie Brooks is a recognized leader in the field of environmental and social equity design and is responsible for firm development in the area of housing and policy, leading the firm's sustainable initiatives and overall design staff management. Angela received the USA Network Character Approved Award for her innovative work in the field of architecture in 2010. Ms. Brooks's firm has received over 50 major design awards, including the National and State Architecture Firm Award from the American Institute of Architects in 2010 and the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt National Design Award in Architecture in 2014. Angie, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in. Design for integration is actually measure one of the Framework for Design Excellence, and I think it's the most important one. It's really what makes a building special, and how do we maintain a sense of place when we have to deal with multiple stakeholders, owners, engineers, and public agencies. So I thought I would show you 4 projects, 4 case studies, and hopefully from these 4 case studies, there'll be some takeaways for you. They are different building types, different sizes. 2 of them are ours, Brooks and Scarpa. One is Leedy Madam Stacy, and one is SQ Dumas Ripple, and they've all been COTE Top 10 winners. So I think I have control of the, nope, not yet. There we go. So the first project is the San Francisco Art Institute at Fort Basin in San Francisco. And this is by Leedy Madam Stacy Architects. They converted a historic Army pier for a school for the arts. And it sits in really an incredible natural resource, which is the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. You can see the view of the Golden Gate Bridge. The pier itself was built in 1909, and it was essentially a shed that served as a warehouse and processing point for the US Army, military personnel, and supplies from about 1911 until the Army left in 1962. In the 70s, the vacant site was transformed into the Fort Mason Center, which is a nonprofit community arts center that exists within this national park. When this decommissioned building was taken over in the 70s, it was crumbling, concrete was spalling, and it needed a seismic upgrade. So it was done in 2 phases, but actually before the first phase that I show in the upper right margin, it's actually a 3-phase project. The first phase was done in the early 90s, I believe, and it was to seismically upgrade the piers that exist below this pier that actually extend as a foundation down into San Francisco Bay. And this was done with the political leadership at the time in the state of California, and it was done through arts funding. A unique public-private partnership was formed with Fort Mason Center for the Arts and Culture, who's actually the master leaseholder in the National Park Service, to create this new campus and the 2 phases that I show here. And the San Francisco Art Institute was done as a part of phase 2. So this is kind of locating you. It's the middle pier. The San Francisco Art Institute is a private college that was actually founded in 1871. And you can see that the main campus is on Chestnut Street, and it's a 25-minute walk from the pier itself. Fort Mason was originally established as a coastal fortification in the 1860s, but it's best remembered as headquarters of the San Francisco Port of Embarkation between about 1910 and 1963. So this is Pier 2, and it was used during World War I and World War II as a supply depot. This is an image from World War II. 23 million tons of cargo actually went through this port. Pier 2 itself was a 70,000 square foot US Army warehouse. And they would take cargo in here, put it on rail tracks, and it would go onto ships. Through the historic adaptive reuse of the building, the goal was to preserve the industrial integrity of this landmark structure, support the school's pedagogical goals, and integrate advanced sustainability building systems. This is a plan of, on the top, you can see the yellow, which is the Herbst Pavilion, and that's actually where the Art Institute was inserted. At the end of the pier is the gray area, which is the Cowell Theater. The blue and the different colors are actually the Art Institute. There was a second floor that was inserted for the Art Institute. The exploded diagram of the elements include rooftop light monitors, a solar array. The purple is the theater, student studios, public exhibition galleries, flexible teaching spaces, a black box theater, a workshop maker space, and the center is a public exhibition circulation space. And all these spaces are designed to meet the Art Institute's commitment to positioning artists at the center of public life. This is an image of the existing railroad tracks, which were in the building, which were considered historic fabric and needed to be preserved. The shell and core phase 1, which consisted of the roof and sort of the building systems, really required the radiant slab to be built. So the radiant slab had to actually be built within and on top of these railroad tracks. No easy feat. When that was done, the design architects actually broadcast the lines of the railroad tracks into the finished slab, and you can see that here. And for the classrooms, the second floor needed to be built. Because the historic fabric was really a shed, the second floor had to be pulled away from the exterior walls. Adding the second floor required both the state and the federal historic preservation offices to collaborate. The second floor required additional support columns. The center needed to be kept open so that natural light floods into this space. And in section, you can see the different elements. In phase one, the historic shed was restored and seismically upgraded with the integrated sustainable building systems, including the rooftop photovoltaic solar system and the radiant floor. And then in phase two, the design team transformed the interior volume into the new arts campus. And you can see that the performance metrics are very good. Small fans were added to keep air moving. And you can see how they inserted the second floor into this historic fabric and pulled it away from the walls. And the topography of the bay is actually not flat, which really isn't surprising. There are a lot of variations in it. And I mentioned in the first phase, the first phase, which started in the early 90s, was to stabilize these pier foundations. And this was done through arts funding. And it's really a testament to the strong political leadership of Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer. And this was really key to preserving this as a cultural resource for this community, because this project wouldn't have been able to have been done without it. This is an image of how they actually got the radiant lines to be placed between the railroad lines. It was very tricky and it had to be worked out with the building and the engineers. And there's a detailed diagram of the radiant slab. It protects this space from San Francisco Bay. And the radiant slab system was chosen for many reasons, not the least of which it eliminates blowing air through HVAC ductwork, but it's also much better, gives us much better user comfort. It's also a lower first cost investment. So for the design team, it was a relatively easy sell for the client, but you can see the difference between an insulated slab and one that is uninsulated. So the money that you spend on the radiant slab is really a huge bang for your buck. And you'll find kind of throughout this presentation that I'll be talking about a lot of elements that do more than one thing, and the radiant slab is one of those elements. The historic fabric had to be maintained. So the acoustic treatment at the roof was actually installed between the historic roof trusses. And then for the mezzanine that was inserted, the acoustical material was actually inserted between the metal decking flutes so that it essentially disappears. Daylight studies were conducted so that spaces could be organized by type. The Black Box Theater is located on the first floor where there's no natural light. And you can see that the building performs very well with huge improvements at all levels while still maintaining the historic fabric. The addition of the solar panels on the historic roof was a bit of a challenge that had to be overcome by the design team, and it was a bit of a push and pull throughout the process to get the Historic Preservation Office to allow some of these elements to be installed. And the State Historic Preservation Office was really instrumental and was an advocate for the design of this project and helped collaborate and push the National Historic Preservation Office to allow this project to be built. There were many instances of collaboration between the design team, the Historic Tax Credit Committee, the National Park Service, and the State Historic Preservation Office, and multiple owners' representatives. And it's really a great story of how all the team members came together to make something new while maintaining the history of the place. This shows an example of how the design team inserted the new spaces, the first and second floor, and how they're pulled away from the existing roof trusses at the top and at the walls. This is one of the ground floor studios. And it's really a great resource for the community, and it continues the arts legacy that has been at this site for literally decades. But it's a great example of how tenacity, perseverance, and not taking no for an answer are traits of successful team members. And really, it was the only way that something like this could get completed successfully. And sadly, I don't know if any of you on this call are aware of this, but we found out that the San Francisco Art Institute is closing due to the coronavirus lockdown of the San Francisco Bay Area. The college's debt and the collapse of talks that were happening to potentially merge this local university or merge this private university with the local one. So it's a very sad ending to this story, and the future is really unknown for this site. The first projects I'm talking about are in California, and I want to go back. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my advancing of my slides. I wanted to briefly note that I believe public policy and codes are critical to establish a higher performing floor for us as a design team, and it's impossible to do higher performing work without them. Most of you know that Title 24 has been around since the 70s, but we've had a lot of updates and new policy, and each time we do, there are predictions of doom and gloom, and then the result is that we find a way to actually meet the target with better results. We actually follow the Americans with Disability Act, and no one asks why our buildings cost more, because all of the bathrooms have to be sized to be adaptable, much larger than they used to be in the past. But we've done this because we as a society have decided that it's worth it for us to design buildings that are more accessible. And I believe climate change is the same thing, and that we should get to a point where we stop talking about and trying to fight for high performing buildings, that they're just really mandated by codes and policies, and we don't really need to talk about it anymore. We can just concentrate on design. So the second project is the Yin-Yang House, and this is by Brooks and Scarpa. It's a single family house in Venice that incorporates a work studio. Our clients wanted a very high performing house that also met their program for a young extended family, for entertaining and for working here. So our initial goals were to save a portion of the existing house on the site, design a passive house, and collaborate with the contractors and the owners and the MEP subs on the systems to make this house as efficient as possible. It's a relatively large lot for Venice. It's about 70 feet wide by 150 feet deep. And there was an existing 1963 wood frame house on the site. So we saved some of the foundations and the framing of the existing house, added to it, and then used the volume of the house to enclose some of the exterior space so that we could open up the volume of the house and blur the line between the inside and the outside. We made sure that good cross ventilation occurs in all spaces and that the floor plates were very narrow so that we could get natural light from both sides. We oriented the solar system so that it also shades the second floor walkway. And we used a radiant floor slab, like in the last project, to both heat and cool the spaces of this house. It was a lower price point, and it's a much more efficient way to deliver thermal comfort. We used a rooftop garden to capture stormwater, and that also provides a really nice green space at that level, which opens to the bedrooms that are on the second floor. The windrows and the solar orientation helped us identify how the volumes should actually fit on the site, and the wind actually comes into the side of the house and not from the front side. So from the street, the house appears like a solid mass with a second-story balcony. But the solid wall actually incorporates a garage door and a front door to the right. So we had 6 goals that I cribbed from Steve Glenn of Living Homes, and they include, the 6th one is zero ignorance. And what that means is really, it's the concept that less bad does not mean good. So we had a lot of goals, and we worked with the client to make something that everyone was happy with. The front door leads to an open courtyard. You can see the dark gray is the front door, and then to the left is the office space with high windows, some operable windows up high, and the green roof on the top. Once you go through that front door, you're in a small interior courtyard that's open to the sky. The image to the right is actually looking from the office space through this little interior courtyard and through the house and into the backyard. And I like to call courtyards the lungs of the building. They really allow us to have cross ventilation through all the spaces. Literally, air can move completely from the front to the back of this space. The radiant floors have an exposed aggregate finish, which is very warm, and the narrow spaces have cross ventilation that works really well. We covered the exterior patio that faces south, so you can open up the sliding glass doors completely so the kitchen and dining area is open to the patio, and it extends your living space into the backyard. The client likes to cook and teaches cooking from this space, so the kitchen is really the centerpiece of the ground floor public space. The blown-in insulation that we used actually creates a much better insulated wall than batt insulation because it fills all the gaps. And the bedrooms on the second floor are very small. The solar array shades the glazing and the deck on the second floor, and the panels were sized for the entire load of the house and became really the design feature of the house. We tried to do a lot on a really sort of small site, and having the clients as integral team members who listened to us and worked with us to meet their goals was really critical in getting to a high-performing building. And the most important discussion we had with them was really this idea that the public space should be prioritized over the private space. So when we made the bedrooms on the second floor, we made them very, very small. I think they're about 8 feet wide. And we did that so that we could enlarge the public spaces. And once that decision was made, everything really flowed from that and came together. This is the back of the house. We try to design elements that do more than one thing. The solar canopy shades the house, and the stair at the rear of the house also becomes these large steps that are seating and actually look towards an open space and a movie projection wall. And after we finished, the clients were really happy. They didn't get a utility bill for about a year, but what they told me about 3 months into that was that they also weren't getting their trash picked up. And that was because the utility service, which is the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, you have to pay for your water and power and trash pickup with one invoice. And so if you're not getting an electrical invoice, you're not paying for trash pickup either. So solid waste wasn't picking up their trash. I think it took them about 10 months to get that resolved, but it's a good example of how the best intentions of policy sometimes don't trickle down to everyone in the supply chain. We work with several nonprofits, and the next project is one of our affordable housing projects. We, for a long time, have been advocates of the integration of good design in underserved communities and building types for people who traditionally can't afford to hire an architect. So my partner with Katie Swenson created what's called the Affordable Housing Design Leadership Institute. And this group meets once a year. It brings developers together with designers. And the idea is to help these developers with one of their real projects, because we came to realize that 70% of the design decisions are made in the first 10% of the process, and that is generally before the architect is hired. And a lot of the reports that they've done are available for free on their website if you're interested. Most think that the relationship between the developer and the design team looks like this, when in reality, it looks like this. It's actually a very complex map of various stakeholders who usually have conflicting opinions on what and how things should be done. And a developer can easily lose sight of the most important thing, which is design. The third project that I'm showcasing is called The Six, and this is located on our previous parking lot. The project is infill housing in a multifamily neighborhood called MacArthur Park, which has one of the highest densities in the US with over 38,000 people per square mile and a total population of 120,000 people in about 2.7 square miles. The neighborhood is called a Walker's Paradise with a walk score of 95 because it's near really great transit, amenities, and bike lanes. Most of the previously homeless veterans that live here don't own cars, and they can accomplish all of their daily activities easily without one. Our client was a Skid Row Housing Trust, and this is their first project off of Skid Row. And one of the most important aspects of designing for integration, I believe, is meeting with and collaborating with your user group. And for us, that was the homeless people who were going to live here. So the Skid Row Housing Trust had a building committee made up of homeless people. And when we did our first design iterations, which showed this monumental stair connecting the courtyard to the street, and we showed that to the user group, they looked at it and said, they really reacted negatively to it. And they said, they used to live on the street, and the street's a very dangerous place, and they didn't want to be connected to it at all. They really wanted to be protected from it, and they wanted to be secure from it. So we redesigned the building to make a more secure entry. This diagram shows the various elements that we incorporated into the project. A roof garden, what we call an urban stoop in the front of the project, which is a stepped courtyard planter. It's not physically connected to the street, but it's visually connected to the street. There are various apertures for courtyard ventilation, and because this is a relatively large project, there are large apertures on 3 sides of the building itself. And again, I think this courtyard is really the lungs of the building. There are social services and a computer lab on the ground floor. There's rainwater collection and 2 linear planters, and we have solar hot water panels on the roof and a solar PV system on the roof. When the design was updated to allow them to have a secure courtyard, we changed the way people entered this project so that instead of going straight into the courtyard, they went into a side yard. And this could have created a very defensive looking building, which we really didn't want, and our client and the user group didn't want that. So we worked really hard to make the courtyard physically separate, but have it appear connected to the street. And with this step planter that actually lowers the edge of the courtyard to the street, it allows us to eliminate what is really essentially a guardrail, so that you can actually be in the courtyard and see into the street, and you feel very connected to it. The project has been designed with as much landscaping and permeable surfaces as possible, and all of the impermeable surfaces are directed to on-site planters. The courtyard is really this amazing social gathering spot, and it's open to the main kitchen and recreation space, which is on the 2nd floor, to incentivize the tenants to socialize. Even though it's a completely secure building, we were able to create a public front that appears open and inviting. And out of challenges really comes opportunity. I'm sorry, I lost my images. Ian, can you maybe
let me
take control?
See what I can do.
Thank you. So I'm going to continue talking while we're trying to get the images back up. For various reasons, we had to pull a permit within 3 months in the city of LA for this project, which is really unheard of locally. So we collaborated with our engineers and contractor to create performance specs for the floors and the roof. And the contractor then did a design build for the structure of those elements. We also prefabbed the wood truss walls. And this made the building more efficient and shortened the permitting time by about 50%. The ground floor parking garage was carefully designed to ensure that it could be naturally ventilated, and this saved a lot of money and a lot of energy and really created a much nicer space that could be repurposed later for another use. Do you guys want to go back to the spot? Yeah. Oh, wait, so give me control.
Okay, Angie, I think I got you to the start of.
Okay, I'm just gonna go back to here. Okay, thank you. One thing that I didn't realize, but realized as we were starting to look through the top 10 measures, as we were designing this project, is that LA County lies along the Pacific Flyway, which is a major north-south route for migratory birds. And the rooftop planting that we provided was really important, and it played a key role in Los Angeles's ecosystem. We know natural light gives a lot of benefits, not the least of which is that we feel better as people being in the space, and we have more energy. And we know as architects and designers that there's a direct correlation between ceiling height of the window, and amount of natural light in this space, and also structural efficiencies, shear walls and wood frame construction. So our windows are always tall and vertical, and they make the space look much nicer. So the final project I want to talk about is the Bio Innovation Center by SQ Dumas Ripple with NBBJ in New Orleans, Louisiana. The planning phase for this project actually started in 2002, after which we then had Hurricane Katrina. So the project didn't actually finish until 2011. The goals were to heal a polluted site, to foster jobs and new companies in a city emerging from the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, and do so with a building combining beauty with less energy than 90% of its peers. And the design team really asked themselves a question, which was, can a biotech incubator serve as an innovator for environmental performance? The design team wanted to express modernity while referencing traditional New Orleans architecture of courtyards and balconies, proportion and texture. So they incorporated an atrium lobby that also provides amenities to the public, like a 100-person event space and a 2,000 square foot cafe directly accessible from Canal Street. Daylight floods the lobby from a partially enclosed courtyard, where a pool, which is supplied by stormwater, features synchronized water spouts that dampen the street noise. There were two key challenges. The first was that laboratory buildings are among the most intense users of energy of all building types. And this is driven by the intense conditioning of outside air used to ensure occupant safety. And this is an extreme challenge in the hot and humid Gulf South. But by empowering user choice over temperature and ventilation at a granular scale, the building was able to achieve a measured energy use that is 1/3 of a typical lab. The second challenge they had was accommodating a wide range of potential lab users while promoting informal interactions that drive creativity. New Orleans has suffered from a decades-long population decrease as talent and jobs have gone elsewhere. In the building's first 3 years of operation, the facility hosted over 40 startups that generated over 200 jobs at all skill levels. The project helps local innovators develop new businesses in a very New Orleans way, with a spatial organization that promotes chance meeting, social interaction, and improvisational collaboration, which is not a great idea right now, but it invites busy people to linger centered on the porch or the garden. The informal ties between people are really key to this city's resilience. And the area has a walk score of 94. Nearby housing has been built, and it's really a walkable, all income level, live work environment and neighborhood. New Orleans is subject to intense rain, flooding, and hurricanes, and has been described as a bad site, but an excellent situation. And the same is true of this project. It sits on a brown field with excellent urban density, adjacencies, and access to public transportation, but had contaminated, poorly draining soils. So after the brownfield was cleaned up, there was minimal on-site parking provided that was permeable. And this was actually the first pervious concrete installation in the entire state. And it was built on top of 18 inches of crushed stone, which provides stormwater storage, biofiltration, and it recharges the entire site. This pool is fed by rainwater from the roof, and it goes into the courtyard water feature, and the stormwater is filtered by these marsh plants. This is the regional water plant soil ecosystem in a microcosm, connecting people back to place. Simulations project that stormwater will leave the site only once every 20 years. This water feature is also fed by the AC condensate, which provides all the landscape irrigation. And this is currently the only use allowed for captured water by state regulation. No potable water was used for irrigation, and 100% of the stormwater is managed on site. The plan layout includes a mix of dedicated lab and office spaces and an almost equal area of flex spaces with infrastructure to accommodate lab uses, but which can be alternatively built out to offices according to the needs of the tenants. The key building structure and shell components were designed with a 50 to 100-year service life. And careful design and modeling of the air distribution system allows lower air change rates to be employed without compromising safety. This is the southwest main elevation of the project. The front facade is 62% glazed, but maintains the summer solar heat gain of the building with 18% glazing. The project uses less energy per square foot than 89% of the buildings in the Labs 21 benchmarking database of over 400 lab office buildings nationally, and it's 67% below the median EUI. The actual utility bills for the initial 12-month period closely track that projected by computer simulation. And this level of performance was achieved through a combination of an efficient building skin, employing strategically glazing with solar controls, highly targeted controls of airflow and temperature, and lighting for virtually every space, and an efficient central plant. New Orleans receives 62 inches of rainfall annually, roughly equal each month, and the local utility company that provides water and handles stormwater runoff is also simultaneously the single largest municipal greenhouse gas emitter. So reducing water use and stormwater discharge can have a tremendous environmental impact, and this courtyard allowed the design team to do that. SQ Dumas Ripple as a firm, I believe, is really setting the standard for post-occupancy studies. The design team and the commissioning agent initiated a continuous commissioning exercise, monitoring energy consumption, systems, and comfort performance, and they identified a large number of items that they had to further fine-tune. And the project is now part of a commitment of all team members involved to the long-term engagement and learning of this project. Glass recycling had not been restored to New Orleans since Hurricane Katrina. So in recognition of this concern, a local artist was commissioned to create this translucent wall in the lobby created out of recycled glass. This is one of my favorite aspects of this project because it really goes back to the idea of creating a special place and answering the question of how can we as design teams connect to community through design. This is a great example of that. So additional resources are online. I wanted to mention that what's listed here is the Common App and Spyder Graph, which is a simple version of the COTE Top 10 super spreadsheet, is listed here. But AIA National is still in the process of creating a consistent framework for design submittals, so it might not be called the Common App in the future. It's still a work in progress. The AIA Design Data App is a free online tool that you can use to quickly search for COTE Top 10 winners throughout the country. And if you use it and search for a building, it will actually take you to the entire application for that top 10 winner, which is held on the Building Green website. And it's meant to be easy to use and searchable. And I think we have a couple minutes for questions.
Okay, I do see that we have had some questions come through. Some of the attendees are putting questions in the chat box. If you wouldn't mind adding those to the Q&A section. As a reminder, type questions in the Q&A box located in either the lower or the upper menu bar of your Zoom window. And I'll go ahead and start with the first ones that came in. Back on the Art Institute project, we have some resilience questions. Was there any concern or adaptability for sea level rise?
That was a Leedy Madam Stacy project, so I did have a conversation with them, and that was not mentioned. But yeah, that wasn't mentioned, so I don't really have any information on that.
Okay, hopefully they can follow up with LMS if they're interested. Another one about, is there something the AIA could do to fill some of the gap that leaves? I think that question was from Gail. Does that possibly have to do with policy gaps in utility assessments, like you were talking about the trash pickup issue? Anything that the AIA can do to help those issues? Yeah,
I sort of feel like that happens on the local level a lot, and it's sometimes hard when as the AIA as sort of a more regional resource, because I live in a place where there are something like 50 cities around me, and each of them have their own challenges, and I think the answer is more in political leadership at the local level, and getting political leadership, getting everyone who works in that city to realize that we all are trying to reach this common goal, and that everyone has this common goal, and how to really kind of collaborate to reach that goal. And in particular, the City of LA is created with silos. So there's the Bureau of Sanitation silo, there's a fire department silo, there's a building and safety silo, and none of them talk to each other. So that's a local political leadership issue, I think. But the AIA could help on that side of things.
All right, question from Kurt. With other regions of the country that are recovering Rust Belt areas, do you have any recommendations to encouraging clients to think more sustainably rather than code minimums, especially when you're working with a project that has a low appraisal value?
Yeah, I would say that for a lot of things that we do, you can easily identify payback times. So what I used to do before LEED was even really in existence was I would make a list of priorities of things that I knew that could improve the performance of a project. Things like insulation, added insulation, white roofs, at least in California, that's a big deal. Making sure your envelope is thermally protected, and then starting with kind of the biggest bang for your buck. And by showing people that it really doesn't cost a lot of money to get 80% of the way there, and showing people that, or clients that, these things could potentially pay back in 3 years or 5 years time, I think, makes a lot of sense to clients and owners. And so it takes a little bit more time for a design team to collaborate, with a contractor if they have to, and to do that. But that was what I used to do before things became sort of code minimums. And here we feel like we're just trying to keep up with the codes now, because every 2 years they get more stringent. So I don't really have to educate my client as much. I just have to follow the code and sort of keep striving to reach that better goal. But that's what I would say, to just look at it on a payback time, or some of it's actually free, but to maybe look at it that way.
Kelly's question might work toward one of your case studies. What were some of the design moves that brought the costs down on the 6 project?
So on the 6 project, one thing that we do with affordable housing, because that building type has such tight timelines and really low budgets, is we do things right off the bat when we design it. So for instance, everything completely stacks in that project. The walls are planar, so there's no stepping going on. We have no buildings that look like wedding cakes, because we know that when you step the exterior of the building, you have to introduce steel or more beams. So there's a couple of things that we just do right off the bat. All the windows are the same size. We really, really concentrate on making a passive building. And if you concentrate on designing a passive building, you're not really adding necessarily a lot of money to the project, but it's the biggest bang for your buck, because you're designing something, shading south-facing windows, or making sure you have adequate cross ventilation and a lot of natural light in all of your spaces, and that reduces your energy load. But just sort of smartly thinking about that as you design. Many years ago, when I was at the University of Florida, they used to call it regionalism, designing within the climate within which the building exists. And if you really do that and try to design a passive building, you'll be able to get there and also meet your budget.
So one of Troy's questions is, well, first he has a comment. He says, beautiful integrations. And the question is, how early do you begin collaborating with the full team, including sustainability engineers, prefab units, manufacturers? And do you have any advice for bringing engineers into earlier design and concept studies as opposed to the formulaic solution toward the end of a project?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the reason why I wanted to show 4 different types of projects is because it really varies, I find, based on the type of project, the size, and the scale of it. So we have a large project we're working on right now, which is over 300 units of housing and over $100 million. And we have engineers we're working with right now, and we're about 15% schematic design. So we start really, really early when it's a large, complex project. When it's affordable housing, generally we're on our own until, till the end of the project when we actually have a contractor. So we have engineers that we work with who are more able to collaborate with us on the environmental side. And so we won't work with an engineer who doesn't understand what an EUI is. We have engineers that we like to work with. So it's really important to kind of pick the consultants that are good, that you can work with. But frankly, we don't actually start really early with a full team the way that the typical integrated process would on a very large complex project, because a lot of our projects are sometimes smaller or more simple. So we'll start with where we think we need to go, which is really sort of from this passive performance area, and sort of design that way. And then when we get our consultants on board, we will talk to them about the best and most efficient way to sort of add the rest of it. But I think what happens early on is that we collaborate with the client a lot more. And so getting the clients to have the same goal that you do, whether it's a net zero goal, or we're doing an affordable housing project right now, which is 100% electric. And I've never done a 100% electric building before with a solar array that literally covers all the load of the building. And this is both heat and cooled. So I think it's important to collaborate with the client early on. And once you set those goals, it's a little bit easier to integrate others into the full team as you move forward.
So speaking of setting goals early, Jed's question has to do with the framework for design excellence. Do you see architects using the 10 frameworks when presenting their design or creating their design, or do you see it more organically as you presented? He's asking because he's checking boxes, all the boxes, and some of them are not appropriate for every project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that we actually use the framework for design excellence, but without actually saying that. So we'll talk to the client about all of these issues, but we won't sort of pull it out as if it's the framework for design excellence and go through it that way. Having said that, there are firms that do that. And one of the things that I liked about the Spyder Graph, which is this graphic representation of some of the measures, it allows you to kind of quickly see graphically if your project is more better on energy, or it meets, maybe it's better on the water side, or it's maybe better on the social equity side. It allows consultants and firms to kind of see, but you can also just talk about that with them without actually showing them the graph. So I think the framework is a good tool to use and talk about it. Whether you actually tell your client it's the framework and here are the 10 points, you can talk about this very same issues more organically. So we do it more organically, but it's really covering all of the same material.
Rona has a question about project delivery related to sustainability. Has it been your experience that meeting these types of integrative sustainability and resiliency goals on large projects has more potential in less traditional approaches, such as design build, concept, design performance specs, where you set the criteria and the burden is on the general contractor to meet the integrated building performance goals?
I would say that I really think that design build, where you work with the contractor early on with large projects, is the way that is really the only way to get successful projects done. We haven't done a lot of those types of projects, but I think when we do our smaller projects, we will actually talk to the client about getting the contractor on board early on in schematic design, just to work through some of these issues. We don't necessarily call it design build, but we want to work with the person who is building it, so that, because we're architects, we don't know everything. So we all want to reach the same goal, but I really believe that we need the builders early on. And I don't think we give control over to the builder, because I don't necessarily think they know everything. It's more of a collaboration from our point of view.
Yeah, and it may be the selection of the builder just as well as the selection of the consultant being critical to the design success.
Right, yeah, I really think that every person involved, and I think the San Francisco Art Institute in Fort Mason was a good example of that, because at every single level, from the design team to the public agency to the nonprofit master leaseholder to the private college to the state historic preservation advocate, and on some of our projects, it's the public works, head of public works who's our advocate. It's the legislature, the person who's gonna actually change a law to allow net metering, which happened on one of our projects. You need advocates at every single level. And I feel like after doing this for 25 years that there is a momentum and there is sort of this sea change where there's enough people now who actually share that common goal, so that you can actually do a successful project and feel like those who work on the project at every level actually do hold that same goal that you have.
Would you say it's the architect's role to help the team maintain those consistent goals?
Yeah, I would. I mean, the architect and the design team, they're really the leaders. And I think I'd really like to see our profession sort of expand and include other disciplines and educate architects to become politicians, and have architects become landscape architects. And really, I think it's the design leader that really needs to lead the team. And it can only be done if we sort of expand, I think, what we've thought of in the past as sort of the traditional architect's role.
Angela had a question about education being that first step. Is it possible to create more net zero residential buildings for our communities? Maybe you can talk a bit about what the challenges you've faced in that realm.
Yeah, sure. Creating more net zero residential buildings, I think, is great. And some cities are actually requiring it now. So in the state of California now, if you design a building that's 3 stories or less, it must be net zero. If you are in the city of Santa Monica, I'm working on a 4-story affordable housing project right now that is going to be net zero and also fully electric. So I think there's a little bit of a learning curve when we upgrade codes and require engineers and design teams and even equipment manufacturers to actually change what they've been doing, not business as usual anymore. You know, we have to actually change the way we've been doing things to get to that point. But I'm seeing that that's the way the tide is moving, and more net zero residential buildings are what is needed. If we talk to Ed Mazria, you know, he says that it's really the large, very large buildings, you know, these small single family houses that are net zero don't really matter. It's really the large energy hogs that matter. And we should really concentrate on those really, really big buildings.
So the big buildings are maybe a better educational tool for the public or the industry as a whole.
Yeah, yeah, and more visible as well. Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you. You mentioned that elements that do more than one thing are consistent through your projects. It definitely makes sense from a sustainability and an affordability standpoint. If you could suggest or do one thing that has multiple solutions for every project, what would you say it is?
That's a hard question. Let me think about this for a minute.
And I saw a lot of radiant floors in your projects, or solar arrays that act as shading.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that you use consistently that just seems to be win-win all the time?
I think solar to me is one of the most important things we can do, at least in this region where we get sun, you know, all the time. And we just finished a renovation of our office space, and we put a solar array on the roof. So we have a very, very small electrical bill that we have to pay for. But, you know, solar panels, something that generates energy, to have something like that do more than one thing, whether it's, you know, as adds to the front of the building, the aesthetics, you know, it shades a part of your building. You know, it's the biggest bang for your buck. But I would say that it really depends on where you're located, where you are. Some elements can do more than one thing, but it really depends on kind of the region within which you're designing.
Right. Okay, so it looks like we've wrapped up most of the questions here, and we're getting towards the end of the program. I don't know, Angie, if you've had a chance to look down at the comments boxes, but a lot of compliments coming through about beautiful, functional, and responsible projects. So we thank you for showing us your work and other case studies today, and appreciate your time as well. Just a note for our attendees, if you've made it this far, we will submit you for AIA HSW credit, and it should appear on your transcript within 2 weeks. We'll be sending out both Angie's slide deck and her recommended resources tomorrow, and a copy of the recording will be made available shortly thereafter as well. And as always, more resources and tools can be found on AIA California's website, which is www.aiacalifornia.org/climate-action. We look forward to you joining us for our next webinar focused on designing for energy that will take place on Thursday, April 23rd at noon. So mark your calendars. Again, thanks, Angie, for your presentation, and thank you to all attendees.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you.